Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with your Alaska weather. As always, please visit our website at arh.noaa.gov, getting updates to the forecast, who that means. Check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391, getting updates to the forecast, who that means as well. And you can follow us both on Facebook and on Twitter. Starting off, we'll take a look at the advisories that we do have out for the state. For the Alaska Range near Delta Junction and down in the upper Kuskokwim Valley near McGrath there, we do have wind advisories out for all 4 of those areas. And those are all in effect from 6 a.m. tomorrow morning until 6 a.m. on Monday. Again, that is for the upper Kuskokwim Valley, the passes of the Alaska Range, and near Delta Junction. Then along the far western coast of the state for the YK Delta area, starting off with the Yukon Delta, we have a winter weather advisory out for snow and blowing snow. That is in effect from midnight tonight until noon on Saturday. And then for our area along the Kuskokwim Delta, winter weather advisory there as well, but that one is only for blowing snow, and that one is specifically along the coastline and north of Kipnik, and that is in effect from 2 a.m. tonight until 10 p.m. tomorrow evening. Taking a look now at our flood potential, only real area of concern is way up north near the Dalton Highway. The Sag River has had some ice blocking issues, so starting to see some overflow from that. But for any details of the impacts to the actual road system, please check the DOT websites and they'll have all that information for you there. Then for our breakup map, most of the area is pretty ice covered, but right there near Nikolai, we do have a portion of the upper Kuskokwim River that is starting to see some open water. But again, for the rest of the areas, all pretty ice covered at this time. Moving on to our satellite imagery, we'll start off way to the west. We can see a part of our low extending out with a low pressure trough extending out over the western part of the Bering Sea. Some cloud cover and showers out there due to that. But otherwise, out in the Bering Sea, a lot of the lower clouds, that darker color extending out into the Aleutian Islands as well. So we move a little bit further off to the east. We'll start just to the south of the Aleutians here, and you can see a little bit of a circulation with our main low pressure system. And you can see at the end of that loop, we have another low coming up from the south. We'll watch this one. This one's actually weaker than the one, even though it looks a little bit stronger there, but it's going to reinforce our other low as it's moving up with the frontal system pushing out into the Gulf of Alaska now. Then as we look out over mainland Alaska, we have a weaker low pressure system out over the interior, producing a few isolated showers there. But for the most part, a lot of that cloud cover was clearing up with just some isolated showers continuing for the southern part of the state down into the Panhandle. Taking a look now at the weather for the remainder of the day, we do have that weaker low there with a mixture of rain and snow out in the western parts of the interior. Getting a little bit colder along the west coast, going to see some isolated snow showers there. All the way up to the Barrow area and then way to the eastern part near Kektovik, we are going to see some isolated snow showers there as well. And then down in the Panhandle, isolated rain showers extending all the way along the North Gulf Coast into places of the interior where it does get a little bit colder. Going to see a mixture of rain and snow there. This is all out ahead of our approaching frontal system with that other weaker low coming up from the south. And that's going to bring a lot of southerly flow, a lot of warm air, and a lot of rain to the areas. Already starting to make its way to the Kodiak Island area and places in Bristol Bay. Yeah, being a little bit colder as we get further to the north there, mixture of rain and snow. Out over the Bering Sea northeast flow, bringing some isolated snow showers to the Pribilofs and to areas in the western Aleutians, but still a little bit warm in the central and eastern Aleutians where we are going to see a mixture of rain and snow there. However, as we move into tonight, some of that cold air continuing to push down with that northeasterly flow, bringing that snow down now into the central Aleutian Islands, but still warm enough in the eastern Aleutians to see a rain and snow mix there for Dutch Harbor. And that southerly flow bringing up a lot of rain to areas around Kodiak Island into Bristol Bay. Still cold enough further to the north to see a mixture of rain and snow there extending up into the YK Delta, but it is going to all become snow as we get closer to the Norton Sound, and some stronger winds, especially along the coastline there, bringing in that blowing snow, and that will extend further to the south as we move throughout the night down into the Kuskokwim Delta area. Up along the remainder of the western coast, going to see some more scattered showers of snow extending up towards the Point Hope area, and then as we get along the Arctic coastline, going to see a lot of fog up there for the night. And then in the eastern parts of the Brooks Range, we're going to see some snow continuing there, but eastern parts of the interior should be pretty dry until we get further off to the west as we get closer to the McGrath area. Rain and snow mixture there. And then with that southerly flow, that front making it to the coastline, a mixture of rain and snow for all of the Kenai Peninsula into the Anchorage Bowl area, down around Cordova as well. The bulk of that precipitation is to stay along the coastline, but some of those showers are going to make it further inland. Copper River Delta a little bit colder there. Going to see some snow extending into the Copper River Basin as well, and then rain throughout much of the Panhandle. A little bit weaker as we get further off to the south due to that high pressure interfering with some of that precipitation for tonight. That'll be true on Saturday as well. That southerly flow coming in from the North Pacific, bringing in a lot of moisture. Weaker as we get closer towards the Ketchikan area, but we are going to see periods of heavy rain as we get closer towards Yakutat, and that heavy rain is going to extend along the North Gulf Coast into places of the eastern Kenai Peninsula. Rain going to continue throughout the remainder of the south central, but become mixed with snow as you get further to the north in the Susitna Valley and places in the Copper River Basin. Should be pretty dry in the interior, maybe some winds out there, but as we get further to the north, wind's going to drop and not going to see a whole lot of precipitation. As we watch our front push along the west coast of the state, going to see a lot of snow developing with some areas of blowing snow continuing around the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, down into the YK Delta, especially in the morning hours, and then becoming a little bit warmer as that southerly flow pushes up, starts to mix some things with some rain, especially in the Bristol Bay area. But out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, northerly flow continuing to bring down that colder air, seeing a lot of snow showers out there extending all the way to the eastern Aleutian Islands. Then on Sunday, flow becoming a little bit more westerly out over the Bering, but still cold enough to see those those snow showers out there throughout all the Aleutians, extending now into the Alaska Peninsula. Then we have our low starting to push in over the Bristol Bay area and bringing in a lot more rain there to Kodiak as well. A mixture of rain and snow for a lot of the southwest part of the state, and that's going to continue up into the Norton Sound. But as we get closer towards the Galena area, you're going to see a little bit more rain out there with some of that warmer air coming up from the south. And then as we look out towards the St. Lawrence Island and the Kotzebue Sound area, some snow out there. Should be pretty dry along the Arctic coastline, eastern parts of the interior. But as we get down into the south central, anywhere south of the Alaska Range, you're going to see a lot of rain from that southerly flow. That rain is going to extend down into the Panhandle, with the heaviest part of that being near the Yakutat area. Looking at our temperatures as of 2 p.m. this afternoon, mid-40s for the most part in the southeast. Some places dropping down into the lower 40s there. A little bit varying throughout the south central. We have mid-30s getting up to as high as the upper 40s, 48 for Anchorage, 46 for Talkeetna. Down at Kodiak in the upper 30s there, 39 for Kodiak City. Down into the interior, we have temperatures primarily in the mid-30s, getting warmer as we get further off to the east. Fairbanks there, 47 degrees, Eagle 48 degrees, but dropping down pretty quickly as we get further to the north. Arctic Village 25 this afternoon, 7 through the pass, then right around 0 degrees as we get along the Arctic coastline. A little bit warmer there at Kaktovik, 11 degrees this afternoon. Single digits throughout the Kotzebue Sound. In the teens throughout all of the Norton Sound, Nome at 15 degrees, and then Gamble there at 7 degrees. Taking us down into the YK Delta area in the teens along the coastline, but we do have temperatures getting up into the mid-30s as we get a little bit further inland. Bethel there, 37 degrees, Antioch 34. Down in the Bristol Bay area, mid to upper 30s, 39 for both Dillingham and King Salmon. Mid to upper 30s as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, 39 for Cold Bay. Then in the mid-30s for the most part throughout the Aleutian Islands. Shimmy a little bit colder there, 33 degrees. And Pribilof's even colder, 24 for St. Paul, 26 for St. George. Our lows for tonight, not going to change a whole lot, but dropping down a little bit for the Pribilofs, getting down into the mid-teens. Down to around 28 for Shimia, down around 30 for the Central Aleutians. Mid-30s as we get further off to the east. Mid-30s for the Bristol Bay area as well. staying pretty similar to what they were this afternoon for the YK Delta area and for the Norton Sound area. Nome getting down to 6 degrees, however, and then staying in the single digits for the Kotzebue Sound area, staying around that 0 mark all the way along the Arctic coastline, Barrow down to -6 degrees tomorrow or tonight. And then we have in the interior part of the state down into the mid-20s for the most part, mid-30s for much of the south central. Homer staying a little bit warmer. They're only getting down to 41 degrees tonight. And down into the mid to upper 30s for the most part in the southeast. Exceptions Ketchikan and Sitka only going to get down to around 40 degrees tonight. Then highs for tomorrow getting into the mid to upper 40s, warmest as we get further to the south in the Panhandle. And then we go into the south central part of the state, getting up to as high as 51 degrees there for Palmer, expected high tomorrow. In the interior, mid-40s for the most part. Fairbanks expected to go up all the way to 54 degrees tomorrow, and staying right around 10 degrees as we get along the Arctic coastline. Barrow not even expected to get above that 10-degree mark. Down in the Kotzebue Sound area, expecting to get up into the lower 30s there. In the Norton Sound area, getting up into the mid-30s. Nome getting up to 34 degrees. Getting up as high as 43 degrees as we get down into the YK Delta area, with Bethel getting up there. And then we have into the mid to upper 40s in the Bristol Bay area, and in the mid-30s throughout the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul only expected to get up to 24 degrees for tomorrow. Switching it up now, we'll take a look at our aviation weather. Pretty widespread MVFR conditions with some of that trough we have, expecting some MVFR conditions out over the western Aleutian Islands, but our low moving up, blowing snow conditions as well, expecting to drop things down to marginal conditions with some IFR conditions along the coastline with that heavier precipitation coming in from the south. Then along the Arctic coastline as well, we're going to see some marginal conditions hanging on, especially in the morning hours, and some marginal conditions for the southeast for tomorrow. For our passes, and AKwx should be VFR throughout the day tomorrow, as well as Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill, however, will both be IFR throughout the day, as well as Rainy Pass. But Windy Pass starting to improve, marginal conditions expected as we move along the Alaska Range to the east. Isabel Pass should be VFR throughout the day, as well as Mentasta Pass. And then Tenino will be IFR, as well as Portage. A little bit nicer there at Chilkoot and White, marginal conditions expected for tomorrow. Taking a look at our freezing level, riding along the North Gulf Coast for the most part, but we have some warmer air coming in from the south, going to help to support that rain that we are expecting as we move out into the weekend. Then our surface freezing line extending down to the southern parts of the Bering Sea as we have that northerly flow, bringing in that colder air out there. For our icing, way out west between 5,000 and 8,000 feet, just some light icing. As we move out over the Alaska Peninsula between 6,000 and 10,000 feet there, dropping down to between 5,000 and 9,000 feet as we get up towards the Kotzebue Sound area. Down in the south central between 7,000 and 11,000 feet there, and then between 6,000 and 10,000 feet out over the Panhandle. Taking a look now at our jet out over the southeast, southwesterly flow, about 100 knots there. About the same as we move out over the main part of the state through the Bristol Bay area, southerly direction becoming westerly as we get out over the Brooks Range. And as we look way out to the west, out over the Bering Sea, out of a northerly direction, 105 knots there. For our 9,000 feet wind out over the Bering Sea, no surprise, we are expecting all northerly flow there, with the strongest being up to as high as 55 knots just to the west of the Pribilof Islands. As we move out to the east, we have that southerly flow coming in as high as 55 knots there, getting up to as high as 60, however, as we get out over the Prince William Sound area, and then flow becoming more easterly out over the state, with the strongest flow up to as high as 40 knots out over the Yukon Delta area. So move way out to the east over the Panhandle, southerly flow there, 30 knots, dropping down to around 20 as we get over the northwestern parts of Canada. Down to 3,000 feet, similar flow out over the Gulf, all southerly directions, getting up to as high as 35 for the most part. But as we get out towards the Kodiak Island area, getting up to as high as 55, 40 knots out of a southerly direction out over mainland part of the state, dropping down to around 30 knots, becoming more easterly as we get up to the Arctic coastline. High pressure keeping things pretty light as we get off the coast there. For the Alaska Panhandle, we do have 25 to 20 knots there, dropping down again as we get out over the inland areas. And the northerly flow out over the Bering Sea, we do have that coming in pretty weak as we get out to the west, 20 to 25 knots there, but getting up to as high as 50 knots again, just near the Pribilofs, a little bit off to the westerly direction. Due to this low pressure, as this moves up, we are expecting those winds to continue out of that northerly direction, but some of the flow out over the eastern parts of the Bering Sea extending out into the YK Delta there should be a little bit lighter as that low progresses further to the north. And then for our turbulence for tomorrow, nothing way out to the west, even though some of those stronger winds are starting to pick up. Not going to be enough to really give us some turbulence off of the terrain out there until we get closer to the AKwx area below 4,000 feet there. A little bit stronger as we get closer to the Dutch Harbor area with some of those stronger winds just to the western side of the Pribilofs there, bringing in a little bit more turbulence for those guys. And then with those stronger winds that we saw over the southwest part of the state, we are expecting some moderate turbulence below 6,000 feet out over the Kodiak Island area. If you remember, we saw that up to as high as 55 knots at about 3,000 feet there. And that's going to push off into much of the western part of the state, extending as high as the Seward Peninsula there, but only around 5,000 feet there. A little bit weaker as we saw with those winds starting to diminish as we got further to the north. And then down in the Panhandle below 6,000 feet there with some of those stronger winds right along the coastline is the primary portion of that turbulence, because we are going to have a little bit of that barrier jet pushing up right along the coastline, so expecting some turbulence along the edge. And if you stay with us, we'll be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Good evening. I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of Alaska Public Media and the Alaska Aviation Safety Foundation, welcome to Hangar Flying. If you tuned in last time, we had Tony Breeze on. Tony is a very well-respected and well-spoken A&P mechanic, and currently with Pen Air. We talked a lot about how she got started in aviation and how she got started as a mechanic, and she had some really good words to say for the women out there who might like to follow in her footsteps, and I hope you had a chance to tune in. And if not, you can catch it on our website. Tonight we're going to talk about another job she feels very passionately about, and that is as the care coordinator for Pen Air. Tony, welcome back.
Thank you.
So what is CARE?
CARE, Compassionate Assistance Relief Effort. That's what the acronym stands for. In the event of aviation disaster with the operator, we get activated to help with families, survivors, and helping the families of victims as well.
What an important job.
It is.
Were you trained?
Yes.
Talk about that.
I've had a lot of training through the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, and through other 121 operators, and within Pen Air as well.
And is this a requirement by the NTSB or
Yes.
FAA or what?
NTSB. And it was the Family Assistance Act was signed in 1996 by Bill Clinton after several accidents had taken place and the families weren't taken care of well at all.
Oh. So how many people on your team?
Right now we're running at about 10%, constantly growing, and so we have a little bit over 50 members.
Wow. And are there recurring training or exercise requirements?
Yes. Annually we do recurrent training with every single team member, and then we also hold individual training, answer questions, and I go through a lot of extra training as well.
So talk a little bit about that recurrent training. Is that one day or a couple of days? Or?
Sometimes it's about a half day. We're revamping the program right now, but a lot of times what they'll be able to do is they just go on our internal website at work and they take course webs and asking a lot of questions and just giving them refreshers on everything that they learned with their initial training.
So it just sounds so important.
It is.
And you hope you never have to use it,
Never.
of course.
It's the training we want to be prepared for and never have to use.
Right. When in your studies, in the training, are there some good examples they use of companies that have done it right, and obviously probably some that have done it wrong?
Absolutely, both. We use information from both scenarios. We have interviews that have been taped by family members that were treated poorly, things that went wrong before 1996, and also the way that even care team members have been thanked for doing such minor roles that people don't think about in what you need help with when you've had an aviation disaster happen.
One of the things we talked about was, I think you had mentioned that it was a requirement for 121 operators.
Yes.
But there must be some lessons or some ideas to share with maybe even GA or single pilot 135 air taxis.
I
Any
think
thoughts?
so. I do. I think that people need to turn towards the NTSB a little bit to get some more information and what they can do and what groups are out there to help, especially like the American Red Cross. And they can get grief counseling and such like that taught to their employees to help in that situation.
So let's talk about GA for just a moment. If there were a GA accident and there was a family involved, if it's a fatality, obviously the NTSB is going to get involved. Would they traditionally or would they normally advise or counsel the survivors on what training, or not training, but what resources would be available?
I think they would definitely steer them towards the American Red Cross to help with that and give them guidance in the healing process.
Well, thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
Like you say, I hope you never have to use it, but it's so important.
It is.
And for those of us who have been through aviation tragedies, it's whatever can be done to lessen the impact.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program and you got to see Tony last time. The care team, I would just ask you to just consider, we're all about trying to prevent aviation accidents, and particularly aviation accidents that involve injuries and death. But you probably ought to think about what would happen, how you would react if you encountered that, even as a GA pilot or the family of a GA pilot. It's very important, and it's best to think about it in advance. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and until next time, fly safe.
Welcome back. We'll take a quick look now at the ice edge. We are expecting the ice edge to slowly move to the south, not quite make it to the Pribilofs, but with that northerly flow out over all of the Bering Sea, expecting that to push down a little over the next couple days here. You'll notice that we are not showing Cook Inlet area anymore, and that is because we are expecting Cook Inlet to be ice-free for the remainder of the season, with the exception of during breakup when some of the river ice floats out into Cook Inlet. Look now at our Marines starting off in the southeast part of the state, primarily southerly flow around 20 knots in the inside waters, getting up to as high as 40 knots out in the Gulf, especially further to the north towards the Yakutat area. Then for Sunday, southeasterly flow, 20 to 25 knots in the inside waters, 30 to 35 knots out in the Gulf, with seas getting up to as high as 18 feet, again highest as we get closer towards the Yakutat area, only around 4 to 5 feet in the inside waters. For the south central, out in the Gulf, southeasterly flow anywhere from 30 to 50 knots. And that's going to be true right along the coastline there for the very northern part of the Gulf of Alaska. Then out in Prince William Sound, easterly flow 40 knots there, seas 10 feet. And then in the inside waters here, down into Shelikof Strait, 25 knots, but getting up to as high as 30 knots, 35 knots as we get to the western part of the Barren Islands there out of an easterly direction, northeasterly as we get into Cook Inlet area, around 30 knots there. And then seas up to as high as 21 feet, highest in the northern parts of the Gulf. For Sunday, flow becoming a little bit more southerly, around 30 knots in the Gulf, and the inside waters, southeasterly flow there, 25 to 30 knots, southerly direction there in the southern part of Cook Inlet, and then southeasterly 15 knots in the northern part of Cook Inlet, seas anywhere from 16 to 18 feet in the Gulf of Alaska. For the Alaska Peninsula, southeasterly flow for the most part until we get way off to the west here. Northeasterly flow there around 40 knots. And then seas 14 to 16 feet on the Pacific side. Bristol Bay area only around 5 feet, but 17 feet as we get closer towards Cold Bay. Then on Sunday, flow becoming a lot more westerly, weaker as we get off to the east, around 30 knots there, but picking up out towards the King Cove area, around 40 knots there, with seas on the Pacific side 15 to 16 feet and 12 to 18 feet on the Bering side, lowest in the Bristol Bay area. For the Aleutian Islands, northerly flow for the most part up to as high as 45 knots out in the east, dropping down to around 25 knots as we get further off to the west. Then for Sunday, flow becoming more westerly, 25 knots with 9 feet for seas as we get off to the west, and then becoming up to as high as 40 knots as we push out towards the eastern Aleutian Islands, with seas getting up to as high as 19 feet, strongest on the Bering side, furthest off to the east. For the west coast of the state, starting with northerly flow on Saturday, 30 to 40 knots for the most part, a little bit stronger there, closer to the Pribilofs, 45 knots. And then as we get off along the ice edge here, we are going to see some freezing spray conditions with those stronger northerly winds, and seas getting up to as high as 22 feet near the Pribilofs. Then on Sunday, flow becoming westerly for the most part, 30 to 35 knots with freezing spray again along the ice edge, seas 12 to 15 feet in those ice-free waters, but flow up closer towards St. Lawrence Island out of an easterly direction, 30 knots there. Along the Arctic coastline, easterly flow for the most part, 25 knots, picking up to as high as 30 knots as we get off towards the west. And then as we move into Sunday, northeasterly flow near Cape Lisburne, 35 knots there. A little bit weaker as we get further to the south, 25 knots. And then an easterly direction, 30 knots all the way along the Arctic coastline. Quick recap for the state. We have our main frontal system bringing up a lot of warm southerly flow, a lot of rain coming in, especially to the Alaska Peninsula and along the Gulf Coast, or Alaska Panhandle and along the North Gulf Coast, with snow mixed in tonight. And then that's going to continue to push into southwestern parts of the state, but going to see some snow and blowing snow conditions along the west coast there. And then some snow lingering as we get further to the north with some areas of fog along the Arctic coastline. But again, I want to reiterate this blowing snow along the coastline. We have some winter weather advisories for snow and blowing snow for the Yukon Delta, and that is in effect from midnight tonight till noon on Saturday. And that's going to extend down throughout the night, and by 2 a.m. we're going to have blowing snow conditions in the Kuskokwim Delta as well. That will be in effect until 10 p.m. on Saturday, that winter weather advisory for blowing snow. Then we do have some northerly flow bringing in some snow showers throughout the Aleutian Islands and Bering Sea. Then on Saturday, we do have those showers continuing throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, but warm southerly flow bringing rain throughout all of the North Gulf Coast, starting to push into the southwest part of the state. With Alaska Weather, I'm David.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.